The gavel came down with a thunderous crack that silenced the entire auction house. Sold to Mr. Dalton Kane for $12 million. Every head in the room turned toward the impeccably dressed man in the front row, his silver hair gleaming. Under the crystal chandeliers, Dalton Kane, oil magnate and collector of the world's most extraordinary things, had just purchased what many considered the most magnificent horse ever bred. Tempest's Promise stood 17 hands high, his coal-black coat shimmering like liquid obsidian, muscles rippling beneath skin that seemed to contain starlight. The horse had been bred from champion bloodlines spanning 3 continents, trained by the world's most elite equestrians, and had never known a day without luxury. His lineage traced back to legendary Arabian stallions and European war horses that had carried kings into battle. Every movement he made was poetry in motion. Every breath he took worth more than most people's annual salary. As the auction concluded, Dalton approached the holding area where Tempest's Promise waited. The stallion's dark eyes held an intelligence that made grown men step back in awe. His previous owner, a reclusive billionaire from Monaco, had died suddenly, leaving behind a fortune in horseflesh that now needed new homes. "He's magnificent," Dalton murmured to his assistant, Cordelia Finch, who stood beside him with a tablet full of transport arrangements. "The jewel of my collection." Cordelia nodded, though something in the horse's demeanor gave her pause. Tempest's Promise stood perfectly still, but there was a tension in his frame, a wildness in his gaze that suggested he was merely tolerating their presence rather than accepting it. 3 days later, the horse arrived at Dalton's sprawling estate in the Kentucky hills. The Kane Ranch stretched across 500 acres of pristine grassland, featuring state-of-the-art stables that resembled a 5-star resort more than a working farm. Each stall was climate-controlled, fitted with automatic feeders, and equipped with sound systems that played classical music to soothe the residents. But from the moment Tempest's Promise set hoof on the property, something was wrong. The stallion refused to enter his specially prepared stall, rearing and striking at anyone who approached. He wouldn't eat the gourmet grain mixtures prepared by equine nutritionists, wouldn't allow the team of veterinarians to conduct their examinations, and seemed to grow more agitated with each passing hour. "Perhaps he needs time to adjust," suggested Dr. Montgomery Vale, the ranch's head veterinarian, backing away from the stall door as the horse's hooves thundered against the walls. Dalton frowned, his investment suddenly seeming less wise. He had purchased the horse not just for breeding purposes, but as the centerpiece of his collection, a living, breathing work of art that would cement his reputation among the elite circles he frequented. But what good was a $12 million horse that couldn't be handled? Give him another week, Dalton decided, though doubt crept into his voice. Sometimes the finest things require the most patience. As if sensing his words, Tempest's Promise let out a haunting whinny that echoed across the manicured grounds, a sound that seemed to carry both defiance and longing in equal measure. The morning mist clung to the valley, like a whispered secret, as 16-year-old Marlowe Sage walked barefoot along the old dirt road that bordered the Kane estate. Her calloused feet had long since adapted to the rough terrain, and she preferred the honest feel of earth and stone to the confining embrace of shoes. She couldn't afford anyway. Marlowe lived with her grandmother, Nora, in a weathered cottage that had belonged to their family for 3 generations. They survived on Nora's modest pension and whatever odd jobs Marlowe could find in the neighboring towns. Her grandmother's arthritis had worsened over the winter, leaving most of the physical work to Marlowe's young but capable shoulders. This particular morning, she was returning from the farmer's market in Millbrook, where she'd sold the last of their summer vegetables for barely enough to cover their electric bill. The canvas bag slung over her shoulder held a few apples bruised ones. The vendor had given her for free and a loaf of day-old bread that would stretch into 3 meals if she was careful as she walked. Marlowe hummed an old folk song her grandmother had taught her, the melody drifting through the morning air like incense. She had a voice that could make angels weep, though she'd never had formal training. Music was simply part of her, as natural as breathing, as essential as the blood flowing through her veins. The sound of thundering hooves interrupted her reverie. Marlowe looked up to see a magnificent black horse racing along the fence line. Of the Kane property, his coat gleaming with sweat, his eyes wild with something that looked like desperation. She had heard about the famous horse from the local gossip Millhouse the Oil. Billionaire had paid an astronomical sum for a creature that refused to be tamed. Marlowe stopped walking and watched the stallion's frantic pacing. There was something heartbreaking about the sight, like watching a caged eagle remembering what it felt like to soar. Without thinking, she approached the fence, her bare feet silent on the grass. "Easy, beautiful," she whispered, her voice carrying a natural gentleness that seemed to cut through the morning air like a blade through silk. "What's got you so troubled?" Tempest's promise slowed his galloping, then stopped entirely. He turned toward the sound of her voice, his dark eyes focusing on the slight figure standing at the fence. For a moment, human and horse regarded each other across the barrier of wood and wire. Two souls recognizing something familiar in the other. Marlowe extended her hand, not reaching through the fence, but simply offering her presence. "I know what it's like to feel trapped," she said softly. "When your whole world shrinks down to 4 walls and all you can think about is what lies beyond them." The horse took a tentative step forward, then another. His nostrils flared as he caught her scent earth and wildflowers, honest sweat and something indefinable that spoke of freedom itself. When he was close enough, he lowered his great head and breathed against her outstretched palm. "You're lonely," Marlowe observed, her voice barely above a whisper. "All that luxury, all that attention, but no one who truly sees you." From the main house, Dalton watched through his study window, a cup of imported coffee growing cold in his hands. His security cameras had alerted him to movement near the fence, but what he saw defied explanation. The horse that had been untouchable for 2 weeks was now standing peacefully beside a barefoot girl who looked like she didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. "Who is that?" he asked Cordelia, who had joined him at the window. "I don't know." "Sir, should I call security?" Dalton watched as the girl began to sing, the same haunting melody she'd been humming earlier. The horse's ears pricked forward, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Tempest's promise looked truly calm. "No," Dalton said slowly, "not yet." By the 3rd morning, Marlowe's visits had become routine. She would walk past the fence, at dawn pause to speak with the horse, and continue on her way to whatever work awaited her that day. Tempest's promise had begun watching for her, positioning himself near the fence line at the first hint of sunrise, as if her presence had become as essential to him as water or air. Dalton found himself watching these encounters with growing fascination and frustration. His team of expert strainers, behaviorists, veterinarians had made no progress with the stallion. The horse remained aggressive and unpredictable with everyone except the mysterious girl, who appeared each morning like a vision from another world. "I want to know everything about her," Dalton told his private investigator, Brick Johansson, over the phone. "Where she lives, what she does, who her family is, everything." The report came back within hours. Marlowe Sage, 16 years old, lived with her grandmother in what the investigator politely termed modest circumstances. She had no criminal record, no social media presence, no digital footprint at all. She worked odd jobs cleaning houses, helping at the farmer's market, doing yard work for elderly neighbors. Her grandmother was a retired librarian living on Social Security. They were, in the investigator's words, nobody special. But as Dalton watched the girl gentle his $12 million horse with nothing more than her voice and presence, he began to understand that sometimes the most extraordinary things came in the most ordinary packages. On Thursday morning, Marlowe arrived to find a section of the fence had been left open. Tempest's Promise stood just inside the gap, clearly able to leave but choosing to wait. When he saw her, he stepped through the opening and walked directly to her side. "Oh, you beautiful fool," Marlowe breathed, running her hands along his neck. "You're going to get us both in trouble." But she didn't send him back. Instead, she began walking down the road as she always did, and the horse fell into step beside her. They made an impossible pair, the barefoot girl in her faded dress and the $1 million stallion whose hoofbeats kept perfect time with her gentle pace. That's how Dalton found them 20 minutes later. His Range Rover pulling alongside the unlikely duo. He lowered his window, prepared to demand the return of his property. But something in the scene made him pause. The girl wasn't leading the horse or controlling him in any way. They were simply walking together, like old friends, taking a morning stroll. "Miss Sage," he called out, his voice carefully neutral. "Curiosity. My experts can't get near him, but you... .. He gestured helplessly at the scene before him. Marlowe's fingers traced along Tempest's Promise's mane. The gesture unconscious and natural. Maybe that's the problem. They're trying to train him, control him, make him into what they think he should be. But he's already perfect, exactly as he is. The horse turned his great head toward her, and Dalton could swear he saw something like gratitude in those dark eyes. It was then that the oil magnate made a decision that would have shocked his board of directors and probably violated every business principle he'd ever learnt. "I have a proposition," he said slowly. "I'd like to hire you." Marlowe's eyebrows rose. To do what? To work with him, to be his companion, I suppose. His translator. Dalton ran a hand through his silver hair. "I've invested $12 million in an animal that refuses to be what I bought him to be. But with you, he's single quotes. He searched for the right words. He's himself." "I don't know anything about horses," Marlowe said honestly. "I've never had training or lessons or anything like that." "But you know about connection," Dalton observed. "And apparently, that's what he's been missing." Marlowe was quiet for a long moment, considering. The offer represented more money than she'd ever imagined having. Enough to ensure her grandmother's medical care, to fix the leaking roof on their cottage, to perhaps even set aside something for the future. But there was something in Dalton's eyes that made her wary, a hunger that suggested he saw her as just another acquisition, another piece in his collection. "What exactly would you expect from me?" she asked carefully. "Spend time with him, help him adjust to life here, make him rideable, trainable, useful." As soon as the words left his mouth, Dalton realized how they sounded. The girl's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Useful," she repeated flatly. Tempest's Promise shifted restlessly, as if sensing the change in her mood. His eyes fixed on Dalton with what looked like warning. "I didn't mean," Dalton began, but Marlowe cut him off. "You want me to gentle him?" so he'll be easier to control. So he'll perform for your friends, win your competitions, add to your reputation. Her voice remained soft, but there was steel beneath the silk. You want me to break what makes him special, so he'll fit into your world. That's not. Dalton tried again, but the look in her eyes stopped him. Because, if he was honest with himself, that was exactly what he wanted. He wanted the prestige of owning the world's most magnificent horse, wanted to ride him in competitions, wanted to breed him for profit. He wanted to own something that couldn't be owned. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Kane," Marlowe said with quiet dignity. "But I don't think I'm what you're looking for." She began to walk away, and Tempest's promise immediately fell into step beside her. Dalton watched them go, realizing he was about to lose both his $12 million investment and the only person who could unlock its potential. "Wait," he called out, his voice cracking with something that might have been desperation. "What if... Marlowe stopped walking but didn't turn around immediately. When she finally faced Dalton again, her expression was guarded but curious. Tempest's promise stood protectively at her side, his dark eyes never leaving the billionaire's face. "Differently how?" she asked. Dalton took a deep breath, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. "What if we let him choose what he wants to be?" For the first time since their conversation began, Marlowe's expression softened slightly. "Go on, I've spent my entire life acquiring things," Dalton said, his voice growing stronger as he found his footing. "Art, property, businesses, experiences. I collect beautiful objects and rare treasures, but I've never... double quotes, searching for the right words. I've never asked what any of them wanted." Marlowe waited, sensing there was more. "My ex-wife used to say I treated everything like a museum piece," Dalton continued, old pain flickering across his features. "Something to be displayed and admired, but never truly lived with. She left me 10 years ago, said she felt like another item in my collection rather than a partner in my life." The admission hung in the morning air between them. Tempest's promise took a step closer to Marlowe, as if offering comfort, though whether to her or to Dalton remained unclear. "What are you proposing?" Marlowe asked gently. "A partnership, not between you and me, but between all three of us." Dalton's voice grew more confident as the idea took shape. "You come to the ranch, not as an employee, but as a collaborator. We give him space to be what he wants to be, go where he wants to go. If he wants to run free in the pastures, we let him run. If he wants to carry riders, we find him riders who understand him. If he wants to walk dirt roads with a barefoot girl, then that's exactly what he does." Marlowe studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. "And what do you get out of it?" Dalton smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "Maybe I learned something about what it means to love something without trying to own it." The words surprised him as much as they did her. He hadn't planned to say them, hadn't even realized he was thinking them until they emerged. But standing there in the morning light, watching this girl who had accomplished in days what his experts couldn't manage in weeks, he understood that. His approach to everything, horses, art, relationships, life itself, had been fundamentally flawed. "There would be conditions," Marlowe said slowly, beginning to consider the possibility. "Name them." He's never confined against his will. No stalls unless he chooses them. No fences unless he can see a way out. No forcing him to perform for your friends or business associates. He gets to decide who he trusts and who he doesn't. Dalton nodded, agreed. "And my grandmother comes too. She needs medical care, and I won't leave her alone." "Of course." There's a guest cottage on the property that would be perfect for her. Marlowe looked down at Tempest's Promise, who had been listening to their conversation with an almost human intensity. What do you think? Beautiful. Should we give him a chance? The horse turned his head toward Dalton, studying him with those intelligent dark eyes. For a long moment, the three of them stood in perfect stillness, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, deliberately, Tempest's Promise took 2 steps toward the billionaire and lowered his great head in what could only be described as a nod of acceptance. Dalton felt tears prick his eyes. When was the last time he'd cried? And reached out to touch the horse's neck. The contact was electric, a connection he'd never experienced with any of his other acquisitions. This wasn't ownership. This was something far more precious and infinitely more fragile. I think, Marlowe said softly, this might be the beginning of something beautiful. 6 months later, the Kane Ranch had become something unprecedented in the world of elite horse breeding. Word had spread through the equestrian community about the billionaire who had revolutionized his entire approach to animal care, creating what some called a horse sanctuary and others termed the future of ethical ownership. Marlowe had moved into the guest cottage with her grandmother, Nora, whose arthritis had improved dramatically thanks to the excellent medical care and the stress-free environment. The elderly woman had taken to helping Cordelia with the ranch's correspondence, her librarian's skills proving invaluable in organizing the flood of inquiries from around the world. Tempest's Promise roamed the property freely, coming and going as he pleased. He had claimed a favorite spot beneath an ancient oak tree where he would graze in the mornings, and he'd developed a routine of walking the property's perimeter each evening, as if ensuring all was well in his domain. But it was his relationship with Marlowe that captured the imagination of everyone who witnessed it. They had become inseparable, moving together with a synchronicity that seemed almost supernatural. She would sing, and he would match his hoofbeats to her rhythm. She would change direction on their walks, and he would mirror her movements without any visible cue. When she was sad, usually after reading letters from her mother, who had abandoned them when Marlowe was 8, he would rest his great head on her shoulder until the moment passed. Dalton found himself changed as well. The transformation had been gradual but undeniable. He spent less time in board meetings and more time simply observing the miracle unfolding on his property. He'd started walking the grounds each morning, sometimes joining Marlowe and Tempest's Promise on their rambles, more often simply watching from a distance as they moved through their daily rituals. "You know what I think?" Nora said one evening as she and Dalton sat on the cottage porch, watching Marlowe and the horse silhouetted against the sunset. "I think he chose her because she was the first person who saw him as a soul instead of a commodity." Dalton nodded slowly. "I spent $12 million trying to buy something that can't be purchased. And what's that? Love, connection, the kind of bond that transcends ownership." He paused, then added quietly, "I'd never experienced it before." The breakthrough came on a crisp October morning when a group of veterinary students arrived for a scheduled visit. Dalton had begun opening the ranch to researchers and students, hoping to demonstrate new models of animal care. As the group approached the paddock where Tempest's Promise was grazing, the horse did something unexpected. He walked directly to the fence and stood calmly as they admired him. "He's never done that before," Marlowe whispered to Dalton, both of them watching in amazement. One of the students, a young woman with gentle hands and a soft voice, asked if she could touch him. Marlowe looked at Tempest's Promise, and the horse stepped closer to the fence, clearly giving his consent. "He's choosing," Dalton realized. He's deciding who he trusts. Over the following weeks, Tempest's promise began accepting other people into his circle of trust. A local boy with autism found peace in the horse's presence. An elderly man recovering from a stroke discovered that walking beside the stallion helped his balance and coordination. A young veteran struggling with PTSD found that the horse's calm presence eased his anxiety. The ranch began receiving requests from therapeutic riding programs, researchers studying human-animal bonds, and families seeking healing experiences. Dalton found himself saying yes to requests he would have dismissed 6 months earlier, watching his prize stallion become something far more valuable than a show horse or breeding stock. He had become a healer. You know what the most expensive thing about him turned out to be? Dalton asked Marlowe one evening as they watched Tempest's promise teaching a frightened rescue horse that humans could be trusted. What's that? My assumptions. I assumed I knew what he was worth, what he should do, how he should behave. Those assumptions cost me months of missing out on what he really had to offer. Marlowe smiled, her bare feet still preferred over any shoes money could buy. The best things in life can't be bought, can they? No, Dalton agreed, watching the horse who had taught him that true value had nothing to do with price tags and everything to do with connection. They can only be chosen. As the stars emerged overhead, Tempest's promise completed his evening rounds and trotted over to where they stood. He lowered his head to Marlowe's shoulder, then, in a gesture that still moved Dalton to tears, extended his neck toward the Millionaire in a clear invitation for connection. Dalton placed his hand on the horse's neck, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath his palm, and understood finally that he hadn't bought a horse at all. He had been given the gift of learning how to receive Levant, how to give it freely in return. The transformation was complete, and it had cost him nothing while giving him everything.